Hello, my name is Kyle Stever, and welcome to my presentation on data privacy and security. Let's begin. So what is data privacy? Data privacy is how an individual and companies share data between each other and between third parties. And this can be anything for advertisers, and it can be Google searches and other things like that. It's just how the data is shared between people and what can be shared, what can't be shared, if there's authorization, if there's not. So how does it affect people? It affects people in the way that when your data is shared, it becomes visible to others and to certain companies, and they can use it for monetary gain, they can use it for research purposes. So it affects you in that it will affect your internet viewing online, and it could potentially affect you in a legal way as well, as we'll cover later in this presentation. And that kind of ties into how it can be used as well, because it can be used for advertisements, it can be used for legal purposes, it can be used for a myriad of things. So who collects it? Well, a lot of people collect it. Almost any company, government, they all collect this data, and they use it for different purposes, and they go about collecting it in very different ways, whether they have permission or not. So, again, are they allowed? It depends. For certain things, users can allow and agree to have a company take their data. Like with Google, if you sign up for a Google Home or a smart home device, then you usually sign up and you can choose whether to share data to improve the service or not. And that's just a fancy way of saying like whether you're going to let Google take your data or not. So who is it actually that's taking these things? So governments, for one. Pretty much every government is going to be trying to take data from their citizens and just absorb things so that they can, a myriad of reasons, and we'll get into the government in a few slides down as well. But Google, Amazon, and as I said, so many more companies just collect data, and they use it for research purposes, marketing, sales, you name it, it's being used for it. And I use Google and Amazon as examples because they're two tech giants in the entire world. The two of the largest tech giants in the entire world. So ways that data can be collected. It can be collected through smartphones, Google Homes, Alexa, text messages, online searches. You name it, if it's connected to the internet, it can be used to collect data and be sold to other companies. Smartphones. You use your entire life is on your smartphone today. So anything from Instagram to your Google searches on your phone to Snapchat to text messages to phone calls, all of it is able to have data collected and then sold or used in a different way depending on how the company or government uses it. Google Homes and Alexas I bring up because they are devices that are continually listening for keywords to be a voice assistant to help you through things like, okay, Google, what is the weather today? Excuse me, I have a little bit of cough. But though I bring up those devices because while companies like Amazon and Google say that these devices are not collecting data all the time, there's a very real possibility that these devices could be activated, could be used to listen to you. They're always listening for that keyword, so by default, they're always listening. So if you're having a private conversation in a room and there happens to be a Google Home Mini, a Google Home Alexa, whatever, it is in fact listening to the conversation. It's just not using that data at that moment. But there's nothing to say that it couldn't. In text messages, they're just it's information, and we'll get into that later. The text message part, I have it here, but we'll get into it in a few slides, more or less with the government side of things. Online searches, of course. Everybody knows when you Google something, 9 out of 10 times you're going to see an advertisement for it on a different website. An hour later, 5 minutes later, more than not, if you search something, you're going to see an advertisement for it or tailor things around that specific search. So security, and this ties into data security. So how is my data protected? Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can I trust these companies, and do I own the data? So, data can be protected in many ways. You can, and this is more or less a broad topic of it, but so protecting your own data is not opting into those certain services, like having on your phone to have it like the Hey Siri, okay Google, to disable those features so that way they're not actively listening all the time. You can choose to not purchase smart home devices And then also the companies that store the data, how they protect it. Companies like Google, they have very secure data centers and things like that. And more often than not, your information is pretty safe. But smaller companies, you might not be able to do that. And it also brings in the thing: can you trust these companies? To a degree, yes. To a degree, no. In the end of the day, they're a company for trying to make business and money, but at the same time, they need customer retention. And with the whole blowout of, very that like Edward Snowden and stuff, how there was a big blowout, back in 2013 with governments and listening in on people and collecting data and forcing data. But we're going to get into that in a little bit later. I brought that up a little bit too early, but can you trust them? It's really up to the person and how well you trust them. So do I own the data? That's a question more along the lines of what is the data about? And a lot of governments and a lot of the way that especially Japan and Korea, they have a stature where if the information can identify a person or is identifiable information, then it belongs to that person. If the data is not identifiable to a specific person, it is belonging to whatever company or the government, and it can be used for whatever reason. But it isn't owned by that individual unless they can identify you. So unless you say your name in a conversation or a text message or something that identifies you personally, it's not yours. And this also varies from country to country, and we'll get into that later as well. So why is it collected? It's collected for a myriad of reasons. For the government side, one of the biggest things is security. They want to monitor people and look for key things. They want to monitor people for terrorism. It's one of the main reasons why back in 2013 with the Edward Snowden thing, they were just collecting huge amounts of data, just looking for any and everything they could use. The data is collected for sale, so that way Google can make some money off of selling your search history and your searches off to advertisers, which can then target you, which will then more than likely get you to purchase something, or at least get your mind wrapped around it. It's a better chance for them to make a sale because it's targeted directly at you. And then for analytical reasons as well, they can look up the demographics of who's looking up this, who's looking up that, very many things. So let's talk about the ethics of data privacy. So the main question is it ethical? That depends on person to person, as some people are more recluse, others are more open. Their definitions of privacy can vary. Same thing from country to country, it can vary. Most people would consider private conversations in home to be a private thing that they wouldn't want to have shared. But again, it's one of those things that it's very up in the air. It's something that you can't exactly nail down as whether it is or isn't ethical. You can just look at what you think is deemed ethical or not personally. So what should be considered private? Obviously, I feel like certain things like in the bedroom would be considered private. You wouldn't want something listening in on those certain activities, certain, conversations between family members, people would want to consider private. But anything you do over the phone or, on the internet is not really considered private anymore because people have access to it. People can find a way to listen to what you've done, listen to what you've said, find a way to see everything. So online's privacy is very different than in person. And then, is security more important than privacy? Should governments be allowed to monitor everything someone does for the sake of security of the country? Should all of our conversations be listened to, all of our searches be looked at and examined to potentially see if we are a terrorist or if we have ill intentions? That's a question that you have to answer yourself of, is the security more important than my privacy? And is privacy no longer an ethical right, but a privilege? Is privacy a privilege or not a right? We have to figure that out now. So, USA versus China. Have they collected data? Yes, they both have. The USA, like I said earlier, I'm going to bring up Snowden. Back in 2013, Edward Snowden released a lot of files, detailing how the NSA and other government agencies were collecting a lot of data on pretty much the entire U.S. population, demanding phone records from Verizon, from AT&T. Just the amount, all the jokes of, oh, the government's watching you. Well, he basically confirmed it to be true. China, yes, they also collect data. How's China been collecting data? Well, recently, around in the city, it's pronounced, I believe, Zhejiang. Don't quote me on that, but I believe Zhejiang. They are confiscating tourists and people's cell phones that cross into the country, downloading software onto their phone that scans through the entire phone, looking at all the text messages, all the photos, video recordings, calendar events, everything, and basically cross-referencing it to a database of known terrorism entities, like known terrorist photos, known terrorist quotes, known terrorist Google searches, known terrorist events, certain things, and it cross-analyzes your phone with that database to see if anything matches up and lines up, to see if you could be a potential threat. But they're forcing people to hand over their phone, unlock their phone, download this software. It's just not a very good situation, because you could have malware installed on your phone. You don't know what's going to be on there. And how does this impact the rest of the world, and globally at that matter? Well, if you have two countries that have a very different view of how privacy should be handled, with the United States, you can't just take someone's phone and download software onto it, demanding to download software onto it to go through the entire phone. You need to have a search warrant. You need to go through the proper course of action to obtain that device and make sure that it is legally allowed to be doing what you're trying to do. Versus China, they can just look at you and be like, I think that guy looks a little bit suspicious. We're going to take your phone. We're going to download it. We're going to see if you are a terrorist. And so this impacts it globally, because you have this miscommunication of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, especially on the huge realm of the internet that we all share together. We need to figure out a way to make it where we understand what data privacy should be and how it should be handled across country lines, just on the internet in general, what's correct and allowed to be shared, where we draw the line between security and privacy, and how the entire world handles everything with data privacy. There needs to be more discussion, there needs to be more communication. People need to understand what's happening more. People need to talk about this, because it's a very important thing. People might think, oh, people just look at what I'm Google searching and stuff, but it's more than that. It's more important than that. Excuse me. But in conclusion, really, data privacy and security is all about how this information is being shared between the individuals, the companies, how it's being collected. Is it ethically being collected? Is it allowed to be collected? Is it being forced upon people? Where do we draw that gray line between the privacy of someone and the security of a nation? Where is that line? Where is that big gray area? Where do we actually fixate on it? And I apologize for this recording being all jumped around. I've been having problems with this recording software all day. I hope you enjoy the video, and thank you for a good semester. Have a great day. Here's my references, by the way, for the presentation. But yeah, anyway, thank you for a good semester.